The next speaker is going to give you another paradigm shift in healthcare. Dr. Usha Kim is from Arvind Netralaya. Now, this particular institution does not need any introduction. She's going to be talking about what they call the MLOP program, that is the mid-level ophthalmic program. They are innovative in many ways. They cut down on cost of care. She will tell you that how they deliver that at a rate that is almost mind-boggling. And what they also do is that they utilize the services of school level people from the community, and not only do community development program in a garb of providing healthcare, but actually are doing a huge service, not just socially, but also in skill development, sustainability, and in providing low-cost healthcare. So Dr. Usha Kim, who was last seen and heard in 2009 in Ficky Hill, now back with us to talk about this program. Over to you, Usha.
Thanks. Thanks to Ficky. For the second time I'm here, once to get the award for the same topic, and now again to talk about how we did it. Thanks to Ms. Shobha and the Ficky, and of course our mentor through this program has been Dr. Narottam Puri. Like in every class, there's always one student who wouldn't be obedient. Sir, I must confess at this very point that I have not followed your template for the mere reason you said you could change the template. But I did answer all your questions, and I'll be happy to answer any more also. I have particularly added all these credentials not to, I don't want to sound not so modest, but the fact that I am an ophthalmologist who've been in service for the past 23 years, and it's always very hard for an ophthalmologist to accept the work of a mid-level personnel. So just to emphasize the importance, I've put all my credentials there. Now, why did we do it was the first question. Well, to put that in the right perspective, I'd like to draw your attention to the scenario today. We have 39 million people blind in the world, of which 12 million are in India. 80% of the blindness is treatable. We're talking about treatable conditions. We were discussing about preventable, now we're talking about treatable. A 10-minute cataract surgery will restore sight to 7.5 million people. A pair of spectacles will help another 2.4 million see. Need 200 million people need eye care in the world, in India, of which less than 10% have been treated. So with this scenario in mind, our visionary leader, Dr. Venkataswamy, wanted to eliminate needless blindness by providing high quality, high volume, compassionate eye care to all. So this was the focus. We started off way back in 1976 with 11 beds and now spanned out into 5 super specialty eye care hospitals, 6 cataract service, which is secondary level hospitals, 6 tertiary level, and we have about 52 comprehensive centers manned only by the mid-level ophthalmic personnel. So today, on an average, we see about 10,000 outpatients, 1,500 surgeries are performed. There are about 5 to 6 outreach camps on an average on a day-to-day basis, wherein 1,500 patients are examined. 300 are being transported to the base hospital for surgery. Classes have been taken for 100 residents, the postgraduates, 300 technicians, and administrators. So this is the scenario on a day-to-day basis. So the focus of Arvind Eye Care System again is outreach, manufacturing, which I'll be talking about in a short while, research, training, and consultancy. So the statistics, to put you in the perspective, we've been seeing about 44 million in the past few years. 4.63 million have been operated or lasered. And in 2014, in a year, we've been able to cater to 3.5 million outpatients. 4 lakh surgeries have been performed, and 50% of them have been free. Now, what made this happen in the past 39 years? We're going to have the 40th year next year. In the past 39 years, what helped us grow to this level? One, most important, was the value system. Second was the way we delivered. Third most important component was the innovation, which is what I'm going to be focusing on. So a lot has been spoken about by C.K. Prahalad, who is the management guru, on the innovations that we've made. Some of the innovations have been the community outreach, through which we've been able to cater to a large number of people. This was our assumption, that we were catering to a large number of underserved population, and this is how we managed it. And to our utter surprise, we realized that we have reached only 7% of the people. And so then we decided that that was not an adequate approach. So we decided to start centers in the villages which have been underserved. So each center, vision center as we call it, served a population of about 50,000. These were located in places where there were no ophthalmologists available in the nearby areas. So by doing so, we're able to cater to about 1 million patient visits, and we are able to make these centers sustainable. Remember, these centers are manned by the mid-level ophthalmic personnel, the functioning of which, I'll just share a small video. This is a tailor. Her problem was near vision. She needed just a pair of spectacles. So she goes into the vision center, pays rupees 20, gets registered. This is all electronic medical records. Vision is tested, refraction is being done for a pair of spectacles. The correct power is measured. Basic tests are being done at the vision center. An eye test is done. Eye tension is measured. The inside of the eye is also looked at. All of a fundus picture is done, especially in cases of diabetic retinopathy. And they're connected to the base hospital. Each of these centers are connected to the base hospital, where the patient and the doctors at the base hospital are able to interact. And this is all done through video conferencing. So the ophthalmologists and the MLOPs are able to interact. I think this kind of a discussion was there early in the morning about connecting people who are able to identify the problems but notify it to the doctors, who will take the ultimate responsibility. So the patient is happy that they've seen a doctor, and the glass prescription is out, and the patient goes away to the technician, who would provide her with the glasses on the spot. The appropriate power is being given to the patient. Now, so how we did it is the next question that Dr. Narottam Puri had for me. So we had to stretch the scarce resources that we had. Ophthalmologists were not easily available, and if ever available, they were all in the cities. So we had to make do with the available ophthalmologists. So what do? An ophthalmologist can perform surgeries. If you have one surgeon with one table, with one scrub nurse, one set of instruments, you would probably do one surgery an hour. But if you had one surgeon, 2 tables, 2 scrub nurses, 6 set of instruments, the number of surgeries goes up to 8. So all it needs is some more paramedicals to be added in the list. So what we realized early on was task shifting to improve our efficiency. So we created a workforce which enhanced the clinical skills to improve the workflow, to also allow the ophthalmologist to carry on the diagnosis and the surgical part, and also engage themselves in research activities. So all of the other skills like monitoring as well as investigations were all done by the mid-level ophthalmic personnel. But how did we get to that level? We had a stringent 2-year training program put in place, and this was standardized across all the hospitals of Aravind Eye Hospital. So these are, again, I emphasize, they are not doctors, they're skilled support staff. And again, we chose these women from villages who were in and around the base hospitals or the centers, vision centers, as I was talking about. And this went along very well with our value system, because they understood the pain of the patients who came from villages, and they were empathetic as well. That's the Aravind Women Power. In fact, we have more women working at Aravind than the men. So these are high school girls, that is after 12th grade, they pass out, and they are recruited not based on just their academics. It's on their personality, as well as there are several interviews and examinations they go through, but these are all very, very simple, about which probably in the interactions we have subsequently I would be able to answer. So all the routine skills, clinical tasks are being performed by these. So the doctors are able to focus on diagnosis, surgery, and nowadays we've been concentrating on preventive aspects as well as on also research aspects. So I'm not being very modest in showing this slide, but then I would love to share this information with you. This is the current scenario. So just because we have this additional cadre of people, we are able to perform much higher than the rest of the world. Now, if you talk about numbers of such large volume, you would be wondering, are we compromising on our quality? No. Arvind's complications are less than half of those in UK. This is a published article. So now looking at what is behind the patient care, we have just 181 doctors. We have about 256 postgraduates, and we have about 2,300 paramedics, 864 support staff, which would include cleaners and other category, a total of 600 probably, of which 64% is by the mid-level ophthalmic personnel. Now, I'd just like to share another aspect of these mid-level ophthalmic personnel, post-12th graders. They're also engaged in this manufacturing unit called the Aurolab, which was started way back in '92 in order to counter the issues relating to the cost involved in getting the consumables. So Aurolab is the manufacturing unit which started manufacturing the consumables required for the ophthalmic surgeries. So today, 10 million people see the world through Aurolab lenses, which is being manufactured by the Aurolab. And these girls that you see on this picture are all 12th graders who have been trained for 2 years to produce these lenses. There's a lot of finesse required to achieve this level of quality. So for the patient and the community, for Aravind, when most people cannot pay, we need to ensure affordability. And what Aravind did was gave it away for free, charged the market rates for those who can pay, but most important, had the mindset. So we just didn't stop with that. We also went ahead and created competition. Like there was some emphasis on looking at each other as competitors. We indeed created some competition, and LICO was the other wing which started off. And there are about 280 eye hospitals which were chosen by the LICO, which are the sick hospitals, wherein, why am I talking in this forum about these hospitals is, in these hospitals, Capacity building workshops have been conducted. A process was put in place wherein these MLOPs were also part of the team who visited the particular place, looked at the system, analyzed, and brought back inputs which helped us develop systems and put them in place. So the impact again was such. So it almost doubled at the end of 2 years in the process. We didn't stop there. We've also engaged these mid-level ophthalmic personnel in the research institute as well, and also went ahead and did a lot of publications with the help of mid-level ophthalmic personnel. So again, the question is, doing good alone is not adequate. We should be doing well also. So this is the graph on sustainability. This is what we are currently. So pursuing our mission, eliminating needless blindness, much has been done, much remains to be done. And in Dr. V's words, intelligence and capabilities are not enough. There must be a joy of doing something beautiful. I think all of these questions were raised in the morning. We do have to agree that it's not adequate if we do it just for the sake of doing it. We need to enjoy as we do it. Now, to answer the last two questions, what were the challenges and what are the challenges we are facing? Challenges that we face currently are the pipeline is slowly getting depleted. 12th graders are slowly getting into other areas, like they would want to go to the BPOs or they would want to work in the malls. Luckily, in all the cities where Aravind Eye Hospital is currently located, there aren't too many malls. But we're soon coming to Chennai, where we might face a major issue. And then, of course, a question of attrition, which is the case for anybody. Now, the last question is, how can you do it? I've shown you all the aspects of how we did it. I think if we can do it, if there is a mindset, I think you can all do it. The only thing I'd like to emphasize here is we need to define the type of people we need to train. We need to have a very stringent training program in place. Job definitions have to be extremely clear. And the one thing that I really like to overemphasize is empowering, nothing like empowering these girls. And of course, a career path. When I talk about empowerment, I'm always reminded about the help we have at home. Whenever I go to my mother's house, I constantly see a new face. Her help keeps changing every week, I think. And I ask her, why is this happening in our house? She says, as long as your grandmother is there, you'll be lucky to have one per week. And I really asked her, what is the reason? See, nobody likes to be told what to do all the time. They like to be empowered. So in my house, I've had one lady for the past 12 years. And the success is because I've totally empowered her. I don't even tell her what to cook for the morning, what to cook for the afternoon, what to cook for the evening. So the main success I have learned from this simple example is people like to be empowered. And I don't want to close with this statement. But again, the success here is the woman power. Thank you very much.
No wonder this was Aravind Eye Hospital has been a Harvard study. I think somehow we have a thought block, which we'll discuss maybe later. But all over Europe, particularly in anesthesia, you will find what are called anesthesia assistants. There'll be one anesthetist probably managing 4 or 5 operation theaters. In the United States, if you go, you have nurse practitioner or physician assistant, the PA program. It was started in India as well, has been stuttering to a start off and on. But Aravind Eye Hospital, through this MLOP program, has proven that it is possible if you empower. But I agree with Usha. I think major reason why you've succeeded is not because of just your intent, but because these are girls working. If the boys were working, no mid-level. It'll all be destroyed. So stick to the girls. She mentioned one other thing in which I obliquely referred to just now, and that will be the subject of the last presentation on eICUs by Shrikant Muthia, who's the Director of Patient Monitoring and Critical Care Solutions of Philips Healthcare. We are very short of healthcare workers in any field that you do, not just healthcare managers, but a 2005 report of Planning Commission had said that we are short of 6 lakh doctors, 10 lakh nurses, and I think 15 lakh paramedics. And I remember Dr. P.C. Reddy of Apollo once saying, what we need to do is double the doctors, triple the nurses, and quadruple the paramedics. One other area which requires a lot of attention, and it is becoming increasingly so as the age at which we die, which was referred to by Dr. Jitendra in the morning, the minister, is that we are getting older, we are living longer, and it's thanks to ICUs. But when you are in the ICU, you require specialist care. And God help you if you are in a tier 2 or tier 3 city where a hospital rarely has an ICU, and if it has an ICU, it doesn't have a qualified critical care person. And if the critical care person does exist, because there are very few critical care specialization programs in India, if they are there, then they don't want to go to tier 2 or tier 3 cities. So what is the solution? Once again, IT and eICU is the way forward, as Shrikant Muthia's presentation will explain to you.
Yep, I'm right here. Thank you, Dr. Puri. I think that was kind of the very well created synopsis of what I'm going to talk. So next 15 to 20 minutes, let me touch upon what we have done and how we have done it. First of all, let me tell all of you something, that eICU is not telemedicine. Okay. Telemedicine is a buzzword which all of us have heard, I don't know, for last 2 to 3 decades. I think there has been a lot of progress on that front. But eICU is something which is more data driven, it's more data centric, it's all about analytics and what you can do with data. The audio visual are a subsequent, it comes after once you get the data. So if you take a look at the problem, why we did this, we have heard a lot of statistics, from our co-panels, and it's really surprising in terms of how we are struggling as India to drive even today accessibility with sheer population and shortage of clinicians. We have about 800 trained, certified intensivists. By the way, there are about 5,000 people who actually man the ICUs today, as per the statistical report. Out of that, about 800 are actually qualified intensivists, which means that they actually have a DM or a postdoctoral either outside of India or within India. I've just heard that actually MC has actually come out with a couple of seats for DM in intensive care, which is great news. So we are moving in the right direction, but by the sheer number of hospitals being added, close to 600,000, by 6,000 hospitals being added by 2019, I think we still have a far long way to go. We can add hospitals, we can add technology, we can add equipments, but getting clinicians there is a challenge which we are all going to face. Also on the devices perspective, from an equipment manufacturer perspective, we also found that the line between the software, the hardware, the equipment as such is getting thinner and thinner, which means that more number of devices have the capability to communicate and throw output data so that you can synthesize, you can process the data. And in India, given the sheer number of equipments which are there, you can actually imagine the amount of data you can actually manage. People have talked about buzzwords like cloud computing, big data, you see all the things in this IT, healthcare, magazines and forums, but it's actually happening here. We have the data and we can do a lot of things with it. So we came out with 3 value propositions whenever we do eICU, and I'm going to talk about what eICU is all about, right? Number one is, whenever we want to drive eICU, which is also called as consultative critical care, which is basically, you have a hub and spoke model where you have critical care intensivists sitting in a hub actually monitoring patients through data. And if they want to look at the patient, that's when they use audio and video. So we found 3 value propositions, which I would say. One is obviously, consistent delivery, which is around growth, accessibility, and clinician mobility. The second one is operational efficiency. And we talked about length of stay and etc. And now here's the time where actually technology can drive length of stay, reducing length of stay. You can actually get more patients throughput, asset utilization. And also with this concept, we also found that it's a good revenue stream for a lot of hospitals, which means that if they're trying to support their peripheral hospitals, tier 2, tier 3 hospitals, this is an amazing technology which actually can help you scale, expand, and reach and address the critical issues which patients face. So here's a quick overview of the program. Essentially, for those of you who are not aware of this, you basically have a remote center where that's where you have the command center, where you have critical set of intensives looking at a lot of data coming in, a prioritized set of data, which is alerts, alarms, and they're looking at n number of beds across, m number of hospitals across India. For example, data could be coming from tier 2, tier 3, or it could be super specialty, or it could be heart command centers. You pick, because most of the equipment which are actually used in ICUs have the ability to communicate today, be it a ventilator, be it an ABG blood gas analyzers, be it monitors, be it infusion pumps, etc. The person sitting in the remote center, which you see there, basically analyzes, looks at the alarms, and actually intervenes to look at in terms of what the patient is going through and addresses. Only when he needs to see the patient, or if there is a visual communication or a conversation that needs to happen, he uses audio visuals. Otherwise, he has all trending, all the data available at his fingertips. So this is kind of the pyramid structure. So at the bottom you see computer intelligence, which is what I said, which most of the devices actually pulls data from, which is continuous monitoring, which actually cascades into critical nurses. About 2 of them, I would say, for 100 or 200 bedded ICUs you typically use, where you do triage, you filter on smart alerts, actually scale down and look at the most important alerts and alarms, and finally you get clinical intervention by intensivists who's sitting at the command center. So how did we do this? There are 4 important perspectives. On the right-hand side, you actually see that there's a different colors there. I don't know if the colors are visible clearly. The darker the green color, it basically means that there are more number of intensivists. The lighter the color goes, basically there are less number of intensivists. Also, in Maharashtra, for example, you see that the bed to intensivist ratio is pretty good. Right? It's about less than 1:50. For every 50 beds, there is an intensive. But as you start moving towards other states, the general phenomena which is happening, which is a big problem because you simply don't have enough expertise to care to patients. We have heard about infection, ventilator assisted pneumonia. We have heard about several other infections which actually come into ICUs and which prolongs the stay of patients. The primary cause is that how do you make sure these infections are reduced? How do you make sure the right drugs are administered, the right intensives actually intervenes at the right time to make sure the patient goes out? So the first point, how we did it, is really getting an entrepreneurial clinician, which is, if you really are interested in terms of getting the EICU concept and really getting to tier 2 and tier 3, this is not just a pure IT solution. I just want to make it very clear. It's not an IT solution where you deploy it. It is not an HIS solution. It is not an EMR solution. It is of course some of these things encapsulated, but it's really about driving quality, a clinician who understands both patient outcomes, who is a visionary, as well as in terms of trying to make this successful in terms of driving accessible care for everyone. Number 2, of course, is technology. It's not simply about having cameras and audio visuals going. I mean, we have looked at it, but it's all about your ability to integrate with existing system with hospitals to extract information out, and that's a very important piece. The third one is business model, and I'm going to talk about business model. This is also not a very, I would say, inexpensive solution. It involves a lot of servers, it involves a lot of software, it involves a lot of hardware in terms of how you actually can make the systems up. So for us, the way we did it was we came out with a lot of options in terms of how you offer customers so that the entire capital structure goes away. It's completely going to be operational, and it's going to be per use basis, and you want to see how we actually action that out. And the fourth important piece which we also saw was IT services backbone. Now Philips as a company, or for the companies I've worked for, you really need some of these solutions, a good backend infrastructure to really get these things going, because at the end of the day you still need that capability of IT, whether it is your call centers, your supports, your application support, everything needs to be there, because this is the critical care software. So if I move on to problems associated what we also struggled, it was not quite easy. This we have been doing it since last 3 to 4 years. And we came out with a new concept, and I've kind of illustrated this concept on the top part of the presentation. What we believe is if you can build a new concept, this was a completely new concept, often giving away technology that clinicians will value, we can over time enable them to invest in advocate the same, which basically means that we didn't think about this technology as a money making, a revenue stream, as a traditional business. When we started this was a business which we started thinking about in terms of how do you get some of the challenges resolved. And on the right hand side, you really see a graph. You get a section when you offer some new concepts or technology, you get a section on the left hand corner who are actually going to start advocating the concept for you. And a lot of other people are just going to use it as the graph tapers down. A beautiful example is the audio industry. I'm sure all of you people would love music. What happened to the audio media industry today? If you look at it probably in 1999 or 2000, the audio industry, global audio industry media industry was probably worth about 14 to 15 billion dollars. That got halved, and probably it's like 20% of what it is today. That has been completely overtaken by streaming devices, right? Everybody has radio on there. It's completely taken over by app. The question is, how are people still advocating this? How are people still making money out of it? Right? That's a big question. Are artists still surviving? The way the new concept has been evolving, if you apply the same analogy here, for any new concepts to be tried, people have to get adopted. They got to start advocating the technology. So you got to give away technology for them to use. But once they start using the technology, I think that's where you're going to start reaping benefits. You're going to start seeing the results. And that's exactly what we did. I mentioned the key challenges. I don't want to go through every one of them, but I do want to mention one of the important things, challenges we faced. When you have clinicians in the hub, right, at the command center watching all the intensivists, you'll always get challenged in terms of saying that who is this clinician to watch me from the command center? I'm at the remote center. I don't need any support, right? So there are some issues, software issues, which we had to manage, and the way we did it was we basically had to get the management involved and make sure that this is embedded with their DNA, and the vision is very clear that this is the way we want to move forward. So, of course, there are other issues which we face through, such as bandwidth, IT infrastructure. A lot of people came and said that, hey, this is nothing but Skype. This is a telemedicine. Some people came and said this already supports in my HIS system. So I think the point I'm trying to make is this goes beyond some of the IT informatics. As it is, in India, by the way, IT is looked upon as an expense. IT is not looked upon as an investment, except for few hospitals, visionaries, where we're actually trying to drive it. So that's the challenge which we have, and until the IT actually blooms, we will continue to face the challenge. Take a look at the banking sector, right? 1998, 1999, I still remember those days when banking was, e-banking was there, right? You could still access your accounts. What happened eventually, if I need to drop a check or if I want to create an FD, I still was going to a bank. There was an inhibition within me that, what if I lose the money, right? And slowly over a period of time, if you look at it, the banking industry is completely, I don't know, I actually see just one Citibank office today. I was surprised in the whole of Bangalore, one branch office, one office where I can actually go. They have removed every other branches, and it's complete transformation the way banking industry is going through. It's digitizing. Healthcare is there. I think it's going to take some more time, but we will get there. So these are some of the results and learnings I'd like to share. On the top left side, you see that, it's when you get data from the machines, when you do analytics, it's different from when you use charts, you start documenting with your hand, because you have machine data, right? So you look at length of stay, you look at ventilation days. I've just had some illustration here, but I can share you about 60 to 70 different metrics. It's all new level of data in terms of the way we are actually measuring throughput. You're measuring length of stay, and actually you're measuring efficiency. And we have data today after working 4 years. It did take us 4 years to get here. At the bottom line, you actually can get to a deep level in terms of number of lines inserted in an ICU. You can actually measure in terms of infections, and we can also measure in terms of number of compliance. And it's all digitized, and it's all automated. So key learnings are IT services, extremely important. So Philips has tied up with big IT giants, where we do provide complete IT services. We also provide end-to-end solutions. So when we started this EICU solutions, we found out that people said that, look, I can't go, doctor said, look, I can't go fix network issue. I can't go talk to servers and other companies. So here's where we came as in providing end-to-end solutions. I did talk about continue to build up on data analytics and information repository. I think this is something which only lately proved us that once you have outcomes, I think we did hear about outcomes and results, it became that much more easier for us to embed the concept in people. And of course, asset light is something. Nobody wants to invest lakhs and crores of rupees upfront when the hospital is actually trying to get some of the basic infrastructure in place. So the more asset light business models are, that much more it's easier to penetrate. Finally, I just want to end this slide, end my presentation with this slide. How you can do it is, of course, build a scalable asset-light model. I mean, some of these new concepts, like I brought out the example of media, in terms of driving adoption. The single most goal whenever a new concept comes in is that you got to drive adoption. Work with an ecosystem. I think it's important to partner with IT services, important to partner with clinicians, provide end-to-end solutions, and of course, it has to be results and outcome driven. Once we started putting results and outcome driven with data analytics, storing everything and leveraging cloud-based computing, it became that much more simplified for us to demonstrate data and actually prove this concept. Thank you.
Thank you, Srikanth. As somebody who has seen this actually working, because they put it up in one of the hospitals I work, this really works. Sitting in Escorts Hospital, one person can handle Jabalpur, Agra, Dehradun, and so many other centers. And this is a great boon to cities where no critical care guy will go. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You've had a flavor of different facets of the healthcare industry, from a manufacturing, from an innovator for preventive healthcare, for clinical parameter measurement, from one of the giants of healthcare delivery systems, from the CEO and MD of a company which is focusing so much on service delivery, from the CIO of a major healthcare chain focusing on the 3 parameters in the F1 project, and from Arvind Eye, where they're taking the PA system or the physician assistant system to a completely different level, bringing down costs of care. Now, I'll need to check with my head of department whether she allows me some time for question and answer. We can? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have 5 questions. But I'm going to request this panel to remain available for the next 15 minutes after the session ends so that you can talk to them. Because believe me, these are the leaders. And these people have proven track records of making things work. And these are innovators who have made a substantial change in the way we think about healthcare. So please utilize the time with them. Yes, please. Yes, gentlemen. Is there a mic available? Or I guess you can be, you can move forward. All right, okay.
So my question is, like, we have the pioneers in the and they have been working upon and they have done a lot of research. Hello. Thank you.
Yeah.
They have done a lot of research work in their own fields because they have a good manpower, they have a expertise, everybody. But if we have to replicate it to the other organizations, because they are the corporate in themselves only, they have been working like Apollo, the Max, the Fortis, they have their own branches. But if it has to be replicated to the other hospitals, how it can be done, sir?
Look, first of all, let me intervene before I shove it to my friend Rajit, who's best placed to answer it. First of all, I don't think just Max Fortis and Apollo are sitting on this dais. You've got a guy who is innovated to provide preventive health care, just 5 employees to start off with. You've got a Philips, which dealt with the egos of clinicians to manage an EICU. And you've got Arvind Eye Institution, which does a lot of service. But to answer your question, may I request Rajit Mehta?
Sure. I think if you look at the fundamental tenets of all that we talked about, anybody, there are 4 or 5. One is clarity on which pain point are you wanting to address in your hospital. what is your vision, right? Second is, being able to align all resources required to deliver that vision and explain to them the why, using process change or technology. And by the way, today technology is not that expensive. The entire beta we're doing in one unit costs us about a few lakh rupees to build that software. That's all it takes, right? So if you're clear on what you want, you involve the right stakeholders, you figure out the changes in process and technology, you do a pilot, and then you hard code and you measure. That's all there is actually, right? So there's no rocket science to this. As long as you're clear on what pain point you're addressing for your hospital, you can easily implement it actually.
Yeah. So good evening to you all. Sir. I'm Dr. Sanjeev Sood. My question is to Dr. Usha about your program on MLOP. So my understanding is neither the MCI Act nor the NABH, which talks very strongly about credentialing and privileging of the human resources, allows us to have this kind of a system, though it has its own advantages, as he's brought out. It empowers and makes it affordable, like advanced practitioner nurses in US and all. But unfortunately, our law doesn't support this concept. So how do you reconcile this situation? And second question is to Professor Sibal. Like when we talk about clinical outcomes, how do you adjust it for risk? Because there could be a tendency amongst hospitals not to accept the high-risk cases or geriatric cases. Like the liver transplant surgeon may not be willing to take up the acute liver failure cases. And when you consider the outcomes, how do you factor in the risk part of it?
This is a question that have been this is a big challenge. Number one, the first challenge that I faced in the first decade was fighting against the ophthalmologists themselves, because they were not willing to take a new cadre where they would act like competitors. Like for example, if you look at the way they are trained, they would probably sit in an optical shop and could dispense glasses, which is actually the bread and butter of an ophthalmologist, truly speaking. So this was one primary issue I had faced 10 years ago. And then over a period of time, and people started seeing the success of the program, eventually now we've come to an understanding that this is an essential commodity. So there are local universities which have come forward to take this as a special course. And so we have the MGR University, which is offering some special courses. We have the Karnataka University, which is offering special courses. And now we are also approaching the Government of India to provide us a council for this particular cadre. So this is an ongoing process, and we are seeing a stepwise progress in this. And I'm sure at some point we will get this accredited. But unfortunately, I have to tell you this, our program has been accredited by the Joint Commission of the United States, but not by our own.
Yeah, I can plead guilty to that, having been in the NABH and still am in the NABH, but I'll pass the buck to Dr. Jairam, who's now the current chairman. Look, there is the reason for that is that whilst the JCI allows a single entity, only OPD services, only ophthalmic services to be given an accreditation, NABH does not have it in its charter. So it's not NABH's fault. The only thing that I would suggest is that in India, this is a paramedic program. Now, paramedic council does not exist. Since 2002, this paramedic council act has been lapsing repeatedly in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha whenever it is held, but it hasn't actually featured at all for the last 13 years. So you can go ahead and produce as many paramedics as you want. And by the way, NABH is now bringing out a special kind of accreditation for just ophthalmology. So you'll hear more about it later. Anubhav.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sood. Excellent question. We are looking at how is it that we're going to look at risk adjustment. But the problem with us has been the other way around. We have to tell our surgeons, don't do such high-risk cases. And they say, if we won't, who will? So for us, it's the other way around rather than actually looking at the soft stuff. But we're trying to get our arms around it, and that's part of our next wave. Excellent point.
Yeah, my question to Dr. Usha, The way you pointed out, cataract surgery takes 10 minutes. Now, recently there is a report that some eye drops are available to remove this. And second one, do you have something or regarding stem cell research for this cornea?
There's a lot of, it is true that there is a publication about eye drops. We won't go out of business, sir. We have new diseases coming up. And about stem cells, there's a lot of research going on in the stem cells. The limbal corneal stem cells, we are doing a lot of research. There is research going on in our institute and many other institutes in the country as well.
Thank you, Dr. Puri. My name is Shobhit Mathur. I'm coming from Bangalore. My question is for Dr. Usha. Dr. Usha, very interesting case that you presented, and you talked about the concept of stretching your resources. Obviously, when you did that, you would have introduced new set of technologies and process in your base center. My question is, what kind of resistance did you face from the clinicians? I'm not talking about the cadre, I'm talking about the senior doctors, while adopting technology, while adopting new processes.
See, I'm basically, you'll have to accept that I'm also a clinician, and the resistance came from me first, because I have to get out of the comfort zone. Technology was not something which clinicians are very comfortable and compatible as well. There was a lot of resistance initially, but then we realized over a period of time that the electronic medical records did save a lot of time, and we were seeing patients much faster. And all the data was reliable and retrievable anytime. All these were brought to the notice of the clinicians, and eventually they got used to it. And we're kind of now comfortable with that aspect as well. Yeah, see, I'm actually, to be very honest, I'm kind of a techno-resistant person. I mean, for me to put every detail into the medical records, electronic medical records, is something which I cannot imagine doing it. And this, when it came to us for developing all these formats for the records, we totally resisted, and in fact, we've boycotted a few sessions also where we were asked to do it. But then they, like somebody in the panel mentioned, don't take a big leap, just go bit by bit. We started off with the general ophthalmology units where things were a lot simpler. We proved the success there, and then we eventually moved on to bigger clinics and the specialty clinics. That's how we got to convince a lot of clinicians, including me.
Well, I can just add one point to what she is saying. If you want to do this, get technologically challenged people to do it, the best way is ignore them. You know, focus on the younger people. They're used to technology, not on people who are older, who are more resistant to change, and certainly men. You know, there was a study, yes, I'm not joking. There was a study done in Singapore, in one of the major hospital groups, about hand washing. And what they found in their study was that the biggest culprits were the doctors who didn't wash their hands properly. Amongst the doctors, it were the senior doctors who were the bigger culprits. And amongst all the senior doctors, it was the men doctor who were the biggest culprits. So if you're wanting to do it, I'll tell you, the junior that I work with doesn't carry a pen. Every prescription that he writes is on the computer, CPOE. And I can't get the hang of, it takes me 20 minutes to write a prescription. The only solution, Usha, I can offer is come to FICCI more often and sit next to this guy, Varun Sood from IT. You will get the infection, and probably you'll also start learning. Ladies and gentlemen, whilst we could go on and on about this, but you'll join me in giving a big round of applause to this panel. On behalf of FICCI and on behalf of all of you, it's my pleasant duty to thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, and we look forward to having many such illuminative sessions with you in the future. Thank you.